Hey, how you doing today? It is Wednesday, August the 5th, and I just want to do a little devotional today for the middle of the week to try to give you something to be an encouragement and to help. And it's something that God's given me a second time from a couple of weeks ago in a message. And it's my experience that when God gives you something again, you need to share that. And so that's what I want to do today. And I hope that it both challenge you and be a blessing. So a couple of weeks ago, I sent out a video that was "No one ever cared for me like Jesus." And I told you at the time that that was last week's message. Well, that day in Sunday morning on the service, I preached a message about the fact that the reason we don't see the blessings in our lives that we could see, and the reason that we live a partial Christian life, is we have small faith. And our faith is shallow, and it is, in many cases, almost non-existent. And so I didn't mean it to be a jerk. I meant it as a challenge that we serve the God of the universe, and yet our faith is small. And in that message, I told an illustration of this missionary that came to our church when we were in Iowa. And he was going overseas. He was going to one of the Baltic states there, and he was going around to churches and letting them know about his ministry. And churches wanted to pitch in and give him some things. And when you go overseas like that, you have a container, one of those huge railroad cars that goes on a container ship. And churches wanted to put things in that container so that he would have some extra things when he got there. And he said that one church gave him some canned food items. And one case was simply an unopened case of cans that had the brand name, and it said black beans. And so when they were unpacking the container, he said that he told his kids, well, we'll put that one over there, and if we need it, we'll eat those black beans eventually. Well, of course, the story goes that they got to the point as a family where they did need those beans. And so they got them out, and before they got ready to open them, he told his kids, we're going to thank the Lord for what he's given us. And, it may not be exactly what we want today, but we're going to thank the Lord for what he's given us, and we're going to have a meal and enjoy what God's provided. So he said they opened up the box. It had not been opened, and when they pulled the cans out, they had no labels. On the outside of the box, they had the label and it had the brand name, and it said black beans, but on the inside of the box, it had no label. And he said they opened the first can, and it was a can of beef stew, kind of like a Dinty Moore Hormel beef stew thing. And he said then they opened up the next can, and it was corn. And he said in the course of that message, he said, you guys, here's what I want to tell you. Here's what I believe about our God. Here's how I believe how big our God is. He said, I believe when that box left the United States on that container, it was black beans. But when we opened it and praised and thanked him for what he'd given us for lunch, it was beef stew and corn. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know. But I know the other day when I told this story, a lot of people in church looked at me like, yeah, right. Come on. That doesn't happen. That was just, the church just played a trick on him. That doesn't happen. And I said, the reason we think that way is because our faith is small, and we don't believe that God can actually do what I just said, that he could change black beans into beef stew if he so desired. So I've been reading this book. I want to put it up there for you, let you see it. I've been reading this book. Okay, the book is called Worry Less, Live More, A Prescription for a Better Life by Robert J. Morgan. Let me just say real quick, if you are a reader, I can't recommend this book enough. He's so good that he has the ability to break down what he's teaching and make it so understandable and so clear. And he's a great Bible teacher, and he's a great preacher. And I love everything that he puts out. I really do. And if you are a reader, I challenge you to to check him out. He's got a bunch of books on hymn stories. And if you like to hear the stories of hymns, that's really good also. And just this is a great book. It's called Worry Less, Live More. And in this book, he's got a story that I want to share with you. And it's going to take me a little while to read it, but I want to share this with you. So it's talking about a poet by the name of Annie Johnson Flint. Annie Johnson was born in 1866. She was born in New Jersey. At the age of 5, her parents were sadly, they died in a house fire, and she and her sister were left as orphans. So a widow lady took them on, who already had 2 kids of her own, and for 2 years it was pretty rough life. And then after that, a family by the name of Flint, a Christian family by the name of Flint, adopted she and her sister, and they moved them to another place there in New Jersey, and she had a much better life, at least them taking care of her. However, at an early age, Annie Flint, she developed debilitating arthritis. It was so bad that she honestly many times couldn't get out of bed. But she was and wanted to be a concert pianist because she was a hymn writer and she was a poet. But when this is what the life that God gave her, she chose to then write more and more hymns and more poems. And one of her most famous is a poem by the name of called God Giveth More Grace. Her name was well known in Christian homes until her death in 1932. In the teens and the 20s, she was known as the Christian poet. Well, there's a man by the name of Hubert Mitchell who was a song director. Back in that day, you had specific song directors that traveled with specific evangelists, and they wrote songs and they used them in their preaching. Well, this man was a song director for Paul Rader, and he saw the words of this poem, God Giveth More Grace, and he was so moved that he wrote a melody, wrote the music, and set it to music. It became one of the most famous and well-known and most used Christian hymns, God Giveth More Grace. Now, the thing is, though, he didn't just put it to music, it got a hold of him. And it really changed his life. And I want to read this to you. He didn't just put it to music, he put the words into practice. If God's multiplied peace can sustain us at home, Mitchell pondered, why not overseas? Why not wherever God would take us? So feeling God's call to Indonesia, Hubert and his wife Helen traveled to the island of Sumatra in 1935 to share the message of God's peace. And they had some astonishing adventures. On one occasion, Hubert and his co-workers plunged into the island's interior to search for an elusive tribe known as the Kubus. It was a rigorous trip through the jungle, and one evening they finally broke into a clearing and they found a settlement and determined that it was a Kubu settlement. When they walked into the village, the women and the children ran away. They had never seen a white man before. And of course, then come these warriors, and they came and held them with spear point and with poisonous blow darts, ready to do harm to them, wondering what was going on. But when the missionaries explained their purpose, the Kubus welcomed them warmly, and Hubert was taken to the chief's hut to spend the night. The next morning, the village assembled to hear what Hubert had to say, the preaching. The missionary opened his Indonesian Bible in John 19, and he began to read about the death of Christ. And he began to explain that Jesus, what he went through in the crucifixion. And at one point, the chief stopped him and said, "Excuse me, what is a cross?" So Hubert ran over to right on the edge of the clearing, and he got a couple of saplings, and he stripped the branches off the saplings, and he laid them out in a cross formation. He bound them together there where they met, and he laid down they put him on the ground, and he laid down with his arms outstretched on that cross piece of what he just made. Well, the chief looked at it and said, "But how could a man die just lying there on 2 pieces of tree? That makes no sense to us." And Hubert said, "Well, he was crucified. He was stood up and he was nailed to the cross. They nailed him to his hands and his feet. So one of the other men in the group in the village said, "What is a nail?" Well, Hubert struggled to try to describe a nail. He looked all over to find something that he could explain what a nail was, but he came up empty. And he could see that the villagers were losing interest and they were walking away. And he was frustrated. And then right about then it became lunchtime. And the chief promised him, "We'll come back after lunch and we'll let you finish." So he went down and he went by himself down to a stream. He was given a banana leaf that had some rice and some dried fish in there for him to eat. And he went down by this stream and he said, "Lord, please give me some way to explain to these people what a nail is. I can't get across your crucifixion without that." So he ate the rice and the dried fish. And he reached into his backpack and he pulled out a can of mandarin oranges. A can of mandarin oranges that he had bought in a little shop before they left to come to Sumatra. He bought it in Japan. Now let that sink in. Mandarin oranges bought in Japan to go to Indonesia. So he opened up the can of mandarin oranges and he was having that for dessert. He was eating down. He got almost to the bottom and he started to hear something rattle in the can. He pulled out that last orange and he looked down in there, and there in the bottom of that can was a 3-inch nail that looked to Hubert to be brand new. He pulled that out of there and he went running back to the village. And he said, "Look, this is a nail. I need to finish my lesson." He explained to them then that nail was used to nail Jesus' hands and feet to the cross. The chiefs asked to see the nail. He put it in his palm and it stuck him. Ow! He realized what it was. And the chief cried out, "Oh, how great was the love of God." And then they began to chant, "How great was the love of God." One by one, members of that Kubu village confessed Christ as their Savior and were baptized into his kingdom. And then these new believers began going to other tribes with the same message and the same illustration to share the gospel in the jungles of Sumatra. I'm going to turn this off and I want to talk to you about something. When you think about that story, it's a lot like the missionary story I told you. But when you think about Hubert and this can of oranges, there's two things that I came up with. Okay? Number one, God made sure that he bought the only can of mandarin oranges that had a nail in it when he left for Sumatra. God made sure that he went to the right shop in Japan to buy a can of mandarin oranges that had a nail that God knew he would need later. Or, when Hubert and his wife left Japan and went to Sumatra, he had that can, but it didn't have a nail in it. And then when Hubert got to the stream and prayed and said, "God, give me a way to explain the crucifixion," God put a nail sealed in that pull-top can in those mandarin oranges when Hubert needed it. Either way, God performed an unbelievable, to our mind, miracle. And the reason we look at that skeptically and say, "Chris, it was just a worker at the factory. He was playing a joke on somebody. Maybe he tried to do harm to somebody by throwing a nail in there." Chris, come on. That just was coincidence. Coincidence that a nail ended up in a can of mandarin oranges bought in Japan to go to Sumatra that missionary needed? Man, you would fall for anything if you got that much faith to believe that's coincidence. Here's the deal. I'm trying to get across to you that the reason those things sound unbelievable to us, impossible to us, they sound like fantasy, is because we have too small of a view of God, and our faith is too small. What do you have troubling you right now? Have you honestly prayed to God to have that taken away? Or have you griped and complained about it for weeks and weeks and weeks? Have you moaned and complained that what's happening to you is unfair? Think about what's going on in this world. I'm asking you a serious question here. Have you honestly prayed, God, I don't know what your purpose in this is, but could you take this away? No, because you know why? Because we don't think that way. We think, well, God doesn't do that. He doesn't just come down and make it go away. If it's in His plan and in His purpose, He does, and He wants to hear from us. I've given you 2 illustrations. One of them personally was told to me, and one I read in a book. Both of them show that if God needs to change something in a can that wasn't there before, God can do that. And if God needs to change something in your life that wasn't there before, God can do that. And if God needs to change something in this country and make something go away or heal something in this country, God can do that. So I'm asking you, how big is your faith? Do you believe God can do that? Or are you going to keep selling Him short and keep telling me that it's coincidence and keep telling me that it's just, those things just happen, it's just an accident? Are you going to tell me that? Or are you going to believe we serve a great and mighty God with whom He said Himself, nothing is impossible with God. Nothing. We need to have bigger faith. We need to believe that God can take care of anything we ask, if it be in His plan and in His purpose. I hope this is a challenge to you. I hope this is a help to you. Hey, if you're a reader, go get that book, Worry Less, Live More by Robert Morgan. It's good. Check out what he writes. But let me say this to you. Think about how small your idea of God is and where it needs to increase. Father, I ask you to give us a great rest of this week. Well, thank you for it. Lord, forgive me for selling you short and help me to have the faith that I should have to be able to lead your church to where you'd have us to go. Lord, we thank you for it. Give us a great rest of this day. Bless those people we mentioned. Lord, pray for Evelyn tomorrow as she goes to start dialysis. I pray, Lord, that would go smoothly and that we could have praises to share with you. Lord, we ask that you'd give us just a great rest of this week. We ask these things in your name. Amen. I'll see you on the weekend.